Global trade. It's the complex web of exchanges that fuels the global economy, connecting producers and consumers across continents. It's the lifeblood of modern economies, ensuring that goods, from raw materials to finished products, reach their destinations efficiently. The invisible network that keeps shelves stocked and factories humming, driving the engine of global commerce. And at the heart of this system, shipping lanes. These crucial routes facilitate the movement of trillions of dollars worth of goods annually. These maritime highways are the arteries of our interconnected world, enabling the seamless flow of international trade. But what happens when those arteries are severed? When the flow of goods is abruptly halted? Imagine a world where the United States, in a bold and unprecedented move, decides to blockade China's access to these vital shipping routes. The ramifications would be profound. What happens when the world's two superpowers collide on these crucial waterways? The stakes couldn't be higher. It sounds unthinkable, a scenario ripped from the pages of a Tom Clancy novel, but the implications are all too real. The geopolitical landscape would be forever altered. Such a move would send shockwaves across the globe, triggering a chain reaction with unforeseen and potentially catastrophic consequences. Economies would falter, and supply chains would crumble. The world watches, holding its breath. The tension would be palpable as nations brace for the fallout. Would this be the opening salvo in a new Cold War, a high-stakes gamble with the fate of billions hanging in the balance? The future of global stability would hang in the balance. China's economic miracle relies on a constant flow of goods and resources. This intricate system has been meticulously built over decades, transforming China into the world's factory. Over $4 trillion worth of exports flow out of Chinese ports each year, destined for markets around the world. These exports include everything from electronics and machinery to textiles and toys. But a blockade would bring this well-oiled machine to a halt. Ships would be stranded, containers would pile up, and the global supply chain would face unprecedented disruption. Imagine the shelves at your local Walmart, once overflowing with affordable goods, now bare. Everyday items like electronics, clothing, and even food products would become scarce. Factories across the world, starved of components, would halt operations. Industries from automotive to technology would face severe production delays and shutdowns. The economic consequences would be swift and brutal. Stock markets would plummet, investor confidence would erode, and economies would spiral into downturns. Inflation would skyrocket, supply chains would crumble, and the global economy could plunge into a deep recession. The cost of living would rise dramatically, affecting millions. The most immediate consequence would be felt within China itself. The bustling cities and thriving markets would face an abrupt and harsh reality. China is heavily reliant on imports, particularly energy. It imports over 70% of its oil, which is crucial for its industries and daily life. Over 70% of its oil flows through crucial choke points like the Strait of Malacca. These narrow passages are vital for China's energy security. A blockade would strangle China's energy supply, plunging the nation into darkness. Power outages would become common, and industries would grind to a halt. Factories would fall silent, cities would grind to a halt, and the Chinese people would face a stark new reality. Daily life would be severely disrupted. The Communist Party would face its greatest challenge yet. The government's ability to maintain control and stability would be severely tested. Unrest, even revolution could erupt, throwing the entire region into chaos. The social fabric of China would be under immense strain. And what about the United States? The repercussions would be felt across the Pacific. We might be the ones imposing the blockade, but we wouldn't escape unscathed. The geopolitical and economic fallout would be significant. Our economies are deeply intertwined. The disruption in trade would affect everything from manufacturing to retail. We rely on China for everything from iPhones to antibiotics. The supply chain disruptions would lead to shortages and increased prices. The economic pain inflicted on China would ricochet back to our shores, hitting American consumers and businesses hard. The cost of goods would rise and economic growth would slow. This wouldn't be a surgical strike, a bloodless exercise in economic warfare. The ramifications would be widespread and severe. This would be an act of economic war with devastating consequences for all involved. The global economy would face a crisis of unprecedented scale. Let's be clear. China is not a nation that backs down easily. Historically, China has shown resilience and a willingness to defend its sovereignty at all costs. Faced with an existential threat, Beijing would respond decisively, leveraging its vast resources and strategic planning. The question is not if, but how. China's military and political leaders would convene to devise a multifaceted response strategy. One option would be to test the blockade directly, assessing the strength and resolve of the U.S. forces. China's Navy has been rapidly modernizing, with significant investments in advanced warships, submarines, and missile systems. They could attempt to break the blockade, risking a direct confrontation with the U.S. Navy, which would be a high-stakes gamble. Imagine warships clashing, missiles streaking across the sky, and the potential for significant casualties on both sides. A naval conflict could escalate, drawing in allies and spiraling into a wider war, potentially involving multiple nations and regions. Beijing has a vast arsenal of economic and cyber weapons, which could be deployed to disrupt and destabilize. They could retaliate with crippling cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure such as power grids, financial systems, and communication networks. Imagine blackouts sweeping across major American cities, financial markets in chaos, and the resulting panic and economic turmoil. China could also weaponize its dominance in rare earth minerals, which are crucial for manufacturing electronics, military equipment, and renewable energy technologies. Cutting off the supply would cripple industries around the world, leading to production halts and economic losses. Dumping U.S. Treasury bonds could trigger a global financial crisis, devaluing the dollar and causing widespread economic instability. The dragon, backed into a corner, would lash out with all its might, utilizing every tool at its disposal to defend its interests and maintain its position on the global stage. This wouldn't be a regional conflict, a storm contained to the Pacific. The ramifications would be felt far and wide, affecting every corner of the globe. The shockwaves from a US-China clash would reverberate across the globe, toppling economies and shattering alliances. Stock markets would plummet, and the intricate web of international trade would be severely disrupted. Think of the developing nations in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. These regions, already vulnerable, would face unprecedented economic challenges. Many of these countries are heavily reliant on Chinese trade and investment for their economic survival. Chinese infrastructure projects and financial aid have been lifelines for their development. A collapse of the Chinese economy would send these nations into a tailspin, triggering widespread poverty, instability, and potentially even state failure. Social unrest and political turmoil would become the new norm. Then, there's the issue of energy. The global energy market is intricately linked to China's consumption patterns. China is the world's largest importer of oil. Its energy needs drive a significant portion of global demand. A blockade would send global oil prices soaring as nations scramble to secure dwindling supplies. The competition for energy resources would become fierce and potentially conflict-ridden. We could see a return to the oil shocks of the 1970s, but this time, the stakes are even higher. The interconnectedness of today's global economy means the impact would be more widespread and severe. Imagine gas lines stretching for miles, the cost of heating your home becoming prohibitively expensive. A world plunged back into an energy crisis. Everyday life would be disrupted on an unprecedented scale. This wouldn't just be an economic crisis, it would be a humanitarian one, with the most vulnerable populations bearing the brunt of the suffering. Access to basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare would become increasingly difficult. And as the crisis deepens, as nations struggle to cope with the economic and social upheaval, the very fabric of the international order could begin to unravel. Governments would face immense pressure to maintain stability and order. The rules-based system that has governed international relations for decades would be strained to its breaking point, potentially leading to a more chaotic and dangerous world. The potential for conflict and disorder would rise dramatically, altering the global landscape in unpredictable ways. In the aftermath of a United States blockade of China, the global political landscape would be irrevocably altered. The world wouldn't simply watch from the sidelines. The ripple effects would be felt in every corner of the globe. The international community would be thrust into a diplomatic firestorm, with nations scrambling to respond to the escalating crisis. Forced to choose sides in a conflict that could reshape the geopolitical landscape, countries would weigh their alliances and strategic interests carefully. Some United States allies, particularly those who share Washington's concerns about China's growing assertiveness, might reluctantly support the blockade, at least initially, to maintain their strategic partnerships. However, even among these allies, there would be deep reservations about the long-term implications of such a drastic move. But even among these allies, there would be deep reservations, with many recognizing that such a drastic move carries enormous risks, including economic repercussions and potential military escalation. There would be a recognition that such a drastic move carries enormous risks, including economic repercussions and potential military escalation. Others, particularly in Europe, would be horrified by the blockade, viewing it as a reckless act of aggression that could destabilize the entire region. They would see the blockade as a reckless act of aggression, a dangerous escalation that threatens to plunge the world into chaos and disrupt global trade. A dangerous escalation that threatens to plunge the world into chaos, leading to widespread protests and condemnation. These nations would likely condemn the United States, calling for an immediate end to the blockade and a return to dialogue to prevent further escalation. Calling for an immediate end to the blockade and a return to dialogue, these nations would push for diplomatic solutions to avoid a full-blown conflict. And then there are countries like India and Russia, which have complex relationships with both the United States and China, making their positions particularly delicate. These nations have complex relationships with both the United States and China, balancing their strategic interests and economic ties with both superpowers. They would likely try to walk a tightrope, avoiding taking sides publicly while working behind the scenes to mediate a resolution to the crisis. Avoiding taking sides publicly while working behind the scenes to mediate a resolution to the crisis, these nations would aim to maintain their strategic autonomy. But this crisis wouldn't be confined to the halls of the United Nations or the negotiating tables of diplomats. It would have far-reaching consequences. It would spill out onto the streets, dividing public opinion and fueling nationalist sentiment across the globe. Dividing public opinion and fueling nationalist sentiment, the crisis would lead to widespread demonstrations and protests. We could see a resurgence of anti-Americanism in many parts of the world, further complicating efforts to find a peaceful resolution and straining international relations. Further complicating efforts to find a peaceful resolution, the resurgence of anti-Americanism would strain international relations and hinder diplomatic efforts. The world, once interconnected and interdependent, would face new challenges as alliances shift and global trade routes are disrupted, would fracture along new fault lines divided by suspicion, fear, and the ever-present threat of conflict, leading to a more fragmented and unstable international order. Divided by suspicion, fear, and the ever-present threat of conflict, the world would become a more fragmented and unstable place, with heightened tensions at international borders and an increased military presence in conflict zones. The greatest fear, the nightmare scenario that keeps strategists and policymakers up at night, is the specter of escalation. This isn't just about a simple misunderstanding. It's about the potential for a small incident to ignite a chain reaction of events that could lead to a catastrophic war. In a crisis as high stakes as this, miscalculation is a constant danger. The stakes are incredibly high, and the margin for error is razor thin. One wrong move, one misinterpreted action could set off a series of events that neither side can control. A minor incident at sea, a misinterpreted signal could spiral out of control, leading to a wider conflict that neither side wants nor intends. The proximity of naval forces, the tension in the air, all contribute to a volatile situation where a single spark could ignite a full-scale war. Imagine this. A Chinese fighter jet scrambled to intercept a United States reconnaissance plane near the blockade line, gets too close. The pilot, under immense pressure, makes a split-second decision that could have dire consequences. The American pilot, nerves on edge, misjudges the situation. In the heat of the moment, with adrenaline pumping and the stakes sky high, a simple miscalculation can lead to disaster. A shot is fired, a plane goes down, and suddenly, what began as a limited economic conflict explodes into a full-blown shooting war. The escalation is rapid, and before anyone can react, the situation has spiraled out of control. And then there's the unthinkable, the threat that hangs over every United States-China confrontation: nuclear weapons. The presence of these weapons adds a terrifying dimension to the conflict, one that could lead to unimaginable destruction. Both nations possess arsenals capable of unimaginable destruction. The sheer scale of their nuclear capabilities means that any conflict has the potential to escalate to a level that could devastate entire regions. While the use of nuclear weapons might seem unimaginable, In the heat of conflict, with tensions soaring and rational thought giving way to fear and panic, the unthinkable can become all too real. The pressure on decision-makers is immense and the margin for error is non-existent. The risks are simply too great, the potential consequences too catastrophic to contemplate. A nuclear exchange would not only devastate the immediate regions involved, but could have global repercussions, affecting millions of lives. The world holds its breath, praying that cooler heads will prevail, that the unthinkable can be avoided. The hope is that diplomacy and reason will triumph over fear and aggression. But the reality is, in a world on the brink, there are no guarantees. The situation remains precarious and the potential for escalation is ever present. The scenario we've just explored, as terrifying as it is, isn't about predicting the future. It's a stark reminder of the potential consequences of geopolitical tensions escalating to the point where economic and military strategies intertwine, leading to global instability. It's about understanding the present, about recognizing the fragility of the interconnected world we've built. Our global economy relies heavily on the seamless flow of goods and services, and any disruption can have far-reaching impacts on everything from supply chains to consumer prices. It's about acknowledging that in the 21st century, economic warfare can be just as devastating as any military conflict. The ripple effects of such actions can lead to financial crises, market crashes, and even trigger military confrontations in volatile regions. So, what's the solution? How do we prevent this nightmare scenario from becoming reality? The answer lies in proactive measures and strategic foresight, involving multiple stakeholders from governments, international organizations, and the private sector. The answer, as complex and challenging as it may be, lies in diplomacy, dialogue, and a commitment to finding common ground. Diplomatic efforts must be intensified to address underlying issues and build trust among nations. We need to move beyond the zero-sum mentality that has come to define the United States-China relationship. This requires a shift in perspective, recognizing that mutual benefits can be achieved through cooperation rather than competition. We need to recognize that cooperation, not confrontation, is the only path to a more stable and prosperous future. Collaborative efforts in areas like technology, trade, and security can pave the way for a more harmonious global environment. This means engaging in open and honest dialogue, even when it's difficult. Transparent communication channels can help resolve misunderstandings and prevent conflicts from escalating. It means addressing legitimate concerns about China's behavior, but doing so in a way that respects China's sovereignty and its aspirations for a greater role on the world stage. Constructive engagement can lead to mutually beneficial outcomes and a more balanced global power structure. It means finding areas where our interests align, such as climate change and global health, and working together to address these shared challenges. Joint initiatives in these critical areas can foster goodwill and demonstrate the benefits of international cooperation. And it means strengthening international institutions like the United Nations and working to uphold the rules-based international order that has served as the foundation for peace and prosperity for decades. Reinforcing these institutions can provide a platform for resolving disputes and promoting global stability. The path forward is fraught with challenges, but the alternative, a world consumed by conflict and chaos, is simply unacceptable. We must strive for a future where diplomacy and cooperation prevail over hostility and division. The future of our planet, the fate of billions, depends on our ability to find a better way. Our collective efforts today will shape the world for generations to come, making it imperative that we choose the path of peace and collaboration. As we look down on our planet, a fragile blue marble suspended in the vastness of space, we are reminded of the delicate balance that sustains life on Earth. The intricate web of international trade routes and shipping lanes highlights how interconnected we truly are, with goods and resources flowing seamlessly across borders. The world is not a chessboard, and nations are not pawns to be manipulated. Diplomatic relations and international cooperation are crucial for maintaining global stability. The consequences of a United States blockade on China's shipping lanes would be felt by every individual on this planet, disrupting the global supply chain and affecting economies worldwide. Blocking China's shipping lanes wouldn't just be an attack on one nation, it would be a significant blow to the global economy, impacting industries and consumers everywhere. It would be an attack on the global system we all rely on, from the food we eat to the technology we use daily. It's a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, no nation acts alone. Every decision has far-reaching consequences. The decisions made in Washington and Beijing have repercussions that ripple across continents, influencing global policies and shaping the future. These decisions shape the lives of billions, affecting everything from economic opportunities to social stability. The question we must ask ourselves is this: how far are we willing to go to protect our interests, and at what cost? These are not just political questions but moral ones as well. The answers to these questions will determine the course of the 21st century, shaping the world for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Comment below with topics you'd like to see us explore next. Your feedback helps us create better content for you.